Somewhere in the North Carolina wilderness, a woman stood in the dark, rifle in hand, watching 8 men sleep. She had 3 choices: complete the mission and destroy them, walk away and destroy herself, or find the third option no one had given her. She chose the one that would haunt her. But that moment was still 72 hours away. The morning came cold to Fort Bragg. The kind of October cold that crept under uniforms and settled into bones. Captain Emma Reeves arrived at the battalion operations building at 0645, exactly 15 minutes before the scheduled briefing. Her boots struck the pavement in an uneven rhythm, the left heel landing fractionally harder than the right, a cadence she'd carried since Ramadi. Most people never noticed. The ones who did never asked. She wore her OCPs with the kind of precision that came from years of making perfection the only acceptable standard. Creases sharp, boots polished to a dull sheen that said professional without trying too hard. On her right shoulder, the combat patch from 3rd Infantry Division, the colors slightly faded from repeated washing. She never replaced it. That patch had been there when the world turned to fire and noise, and Miller's blood on her hands. The leather notebook tucked under her arm held 3 months of work. Medical logistics planning for Mountain Forge, the 5-day survival exercise scheduled to push Alpha Company through the Appalachian wilderness. She had mapped casualty evacuation routes, calculated supply cache locations, projected injury rates based on terrain and weather patterns. She had done this because it was her job. She had done it alone because no one had asked her to join the planning sessions. The operations building stood 3 stories tall, brick and glass and the weight of 100 years of military tradition. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed their eternal song. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with floor wax and the particular mustiness of a building that never quite dried out. Officers moved through hallways with the purposeful stride of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Emma walked toward the main briefing room, her footsteps echoing slightly in the corridor. Through the glass panel in the door, she could see them already gathering. Major Derek Vaughn stood at the front, tall and confident, gesturing at a map projected on the wall. Around the conference table sat the command staff, folders open, tablets glowing. The room had that energy of important work being done by important people. Staff Sergeant Kowalski stood outside the door, clipboard in hand, checking names against a roster. He was young, maybe 26, with the kind of face that still believed the system was fair if you followed the rules. He looked up as Emma approached, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite discomfort, more like recognition of an awkward duty. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "this meeting is restricted to command staff only." Emma stopped 3 feet from the door. Her face remained perfectly neutral, the expression she'd practiced in 1,000 mirrors in 1,000 moments when neutrality was the only armor she had. "I was on the distribution list," she said. Her voice carried no challenge, no emotion, just a statement of fact. Kowalski glanced down at his tablet, tapped the screen twice, then looked back up without quite meeting her eyes. "Not anymore, ma'am. Major Vaughn updated the list this morning. Medical logistics will be covered by the field medics assigned to each squad." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Emma could see through the glass door. She could see Vaughn's back as he pointed at something on the map. She could see Captain Williams nodding, taking notes. She could see the empty chair that had probably never been meant for her in the first place. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to let Kowalski know she understood. Long enough to let him see that understanding in her eyes. Not anger, not hurt, just the calm acknowledgement of a door being closed. Then she turned and walked away, the uneven tap of her boots the only sound in the empty hallway. Inside the briefing room, Derek Vaughn continued his presentation, describing the route Alpha Company would take through the mountains, the checkpoints they'd hit, the scenarios they'd face. Mid-sentence, something pulled his attention to the window. Through the glass, across the courtyard, he caught a glimpse of a figure moving away from the building. Compact frame, distinctive gait. Even at a distance, unmistakable. A thin smile crossed his face, there and gone in an instant. He turned back to his audience. "As I was saying," he continued smoothly, "medical support will be provided by the field medics embedded with each squad. We don't need desk officers slowing down an operational exercise." Soft laughter rippled through the room. Most of them joined in, the easy camaraderie of people who understood the joke and their place in telling it. But one person didn't laugh. Warrant Officer Kate Hendricks sat near the back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Vaughn with an expression that said she was hearing something different than everyone else. She was a helicopter pilot, 35 years old, with the kind of face that had seen enough to know when something was wrong. She'd flown medevac in Afghanistan. She knew what real medical logistics looked like. She knew what happened when people like Emma Reeves got left out of the planning. She said nothing, just made a small mark in her notebook and kept listening. The briefing continued for another 40 minutes. Routes, timelines, weather projections, rules of engagement for the exercise. Standard stuff, delivered with the confidence of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. When it ended, officers gathered their materials and filed out, already thinking about the next meeting, the next deadline, the next box to check. None of them thought about the woman who had been excluded. Why would they? She was just a medical service corps officer, former enlisted, a combat medic who'd managed to commission but never quite shook the smell of the aid station. In a world of infantry and armor and aviation, she was background noise. They didn't know about the scar tissue in her left knee, the gift from an IED that had turned a Humvee into flying metal and Miller into a name she whispered in the dark. They didn't know about the 18 months she'd spent learning to walk again, to run again, to prove that broken could be rebuilt into something stronger. They didn't know because she never told them, and they never asked. Emma spent the rest of the day in her small office on the second floor of the medical battalion building. It was barely large enough for a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet, but it had a window that looked out over the training fields. She could see soldiers running PT in formation, their cadence calls drifting up like distant thunder. She opened her laptop and continued working on the medical logistics plan that no one had asked for, because the exercise was still happening. Alpha Company was still going into the mountains. And when someone broke an ankle or took a bad fall or pushed too hard and collapsed from heat exhaustion, the medical plan would matter more than Derek Vaughn's briefing slides. Her phone buzzed once, a text from Hendricks. Saw what happened this morning. You okay? Emma typed back, fine, thanks. 3 letters. The minimum required to end a conversation without seeming rude. She set the phone face down on her desk and went back to work. The afternoon bled into evening. The sun dropped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of burning things. She was deep into calculating morphine auto-injector requirements when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, military precise, not the uncertain tap of a subordinate or the casual bang of a peer. This was authority announcing itself. Emma stood, straightened her uniform top, and opened the door. Colonel Raymond Hale stood in the hallway, 61 years old and carved from granite. His hair had gone silver years ago, cut high and tight in a style that predated half the regulations currently on the books. His eyes were the color of steel in winter, and they missed nothing. 2 silver eagles on his collar, combat patch from 1st Cavalry Division, Ranger tab, Special Forces tab, a career spent in places where the wrong decision meant body bags. He stepped inside without waiting for invitation and closed the door behind him. He didn't turn on the overhead light. The only illumination came from Emma's desk lamp and the dying sun through the window, casting long shadows across the small room. You were excluded again, Hale said. Not a question. Yes, sir. Vaughn thinks you're weak. Emma said nothing. What was there to say? Vaughn thought what he thought. She couldn't change that with words. Hale moved to the window, looked out over the darkening training fields. Are you weak, Captain? No, sir. He turned to face her. The shadows made his face harder, older, like something weathered by decades of making choices other people couldn't stomach. Prove it. From inside his jacket, he produced a manila envelope. Standard government issue, slightly worn at the edges. He placed it on her desk with deliberate care. Emma looked at it, but didn't move. Open it, Hale said quietly. She picked up the envelope, not sealed, just clasped. Inside, she found a topographical map of the training area where Mountain Forge would take place, annotated in pencil with coordinates and timelines. Beneath the map, a small card with a radio frequency handwritten in black ink. And beneath that, a single sheet of paper with 4 lines written in Hale's precise script. Survive 72 hours. Leave a mark they can't ignore. No rules, no backup, no excuses. Burn this after reading. Emma read it twice, looked up at Hale, looked back down at the paper. Sir, she began carefully. What is this? A test, Hale replied. Mine, not theirs. A test of what? Whether you're a wolf or a sheep. The words settled into the room like stones dropping into deep water. Emma could feel her pulse in her bone steady but insistent. She looked at the map again, recognizing the terrain she'd studied for 3 months. The mountains, the valleys, the thousand places where something could go right or catastrophically wrong. "You have 12 hours to decide," Hale said. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "Emma," he added, using her first name for the first time in the 2 years she'd known him, "they excluded you because you make them uncomfortable. You don't fit their idea of what belongs in a briefing room. But uncomfortable people are the ones who survive when comfortable people die. Remember that." He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and was gone. Emma stood alone in her office, the envelope in her hands, the shadows growing longer around her. Through the window, she could see lights coming on across the base, small points of warmth against the gathering dark. Somewhere out there, Derek Vaughn was probably having dinner at the officers' club, laughing with his peers, secure in the knowledge that his world made sense and his place in it was assured. She looked down at the paper again. Survive 72 hours. Leave a mark they can't ignore. A test, but of what exactly? Her skills? Her resolve? Or something deeper? Something that had been broken in Ramadi and never quite healed, right? Just like her knee? She sat down at her desk, pulled out her lighter, and held the flame to the corner of the paper. It caught quickly, curling black and orange. She held it until the heat touched her fingers, then dropped it into her metal trash can and watched it burn to ash. The map and the radio frequency she folded carefully and tucked into her notebook. Then she opened a drawer and pulled out a different notebook, one she kept separate from official work. Personal. The pages were filled with sketches and calculations and observations that had nothing to do with medical logistics. Terrain analysis, hide site locations, approach routes that avoided natural lines of drift. The kind of knowledge she'd learned as a combat medic, refined during long nights when sleep wouldn't come and memories did. She turned to a blank page and began to write, not a plan exactly, more like a framework, a skeleton that would need muscle and sinew, and the kind of details that could only be worked out in the moment. At 2200 hours, she closed the notebook, shut down her laptop, and locked her office. The hallways were empty now, just the hum of HVAC and the distant sound of footsteps from the floor above. She walked to her car, a 10-year-old Subaru that ran well and drew no attention, and drove off base. She lived in a small apartment in Fayetteville, 15 minutes from the front gate. One bedroom, minimal furniture, nothing on the walls except a single photograph of her graduating basic training. She didn't spend much time there. It was a place to sleep and store the things the Army didn't issue. But tonight she didn't go home. Instead, she drove to a 24-hour gym on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled like rubber and sweat and had equipment that actually got used. She changed into PT gear and spent 2 hours working through a routine that had nothing to do with the Army's fitness standards. Calisthenics, stretching, focused work on her left leg, pushing the rebuilt knee through ranges of motion that ached but held. Then she went to the locker room, showered, and stood in front of the mirror. The fluorescent lights were brutal, showing every scar, every imperfection. The thin white line across her left forearm where shrapnel had kissed her. The patchwork of surgical scars on her knee, neat and professional. And the one she never talked about. The burn mark on her right shoulder blade from where burning fabric had melted into skin while she dragged Miller's body away from the flames. She touched that scar now, felt the rough texture under her fingertips. Remembered the smell, remembered Miller asking if they were coming back, and her lying to make his last minutes easier. "They left us, didn't they?" he'd whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "They left us behind." "They'll come back," she'd said, knowing it was a lie. "Liar," he'd breathed. Then nothing. Emma closed her eyes, counted to 10, opened them again. The woman in the mirror looked back, and she saw what she always saw, someone who had survived when she shouldn't have, and wasn't sure if that made her lucky or cursed. She got dressed, civilian clothes this time, and drove back to base. But she didn't go to her office. Instead, she went to the arms room in the training support building. It was 0200 hours. The building was supposed to be locked, but Emma had Medical Service Corps access codes. Clearances that let her into places most people didn't think about. Medical logistics meant having keys to the kingdom because medical emergencies didn't respect duty hours. The arms room was dim, lit by emergency lighting that cast everything in shades of red. Racks of weapons secured behind chain link and steel, ammunition in locked containers, training equipment stacked in organized chaos. She moved through the space with quiet efficiency, pulling items that wouldn't be missed for days. Smoke grenades marked for disposal, paint marking rounds from the last force-on-force exercise, trip flares that had been cycled out of active inventory but still function, a set of night vision goggles that were scheduled for maintenance. None of it was supposed to leave the arms room without proper signatures and paperwork. But Emma had learned long ago that the difference between permission and forgiveness often came down to results. She was packing the last of the gear into a nondescript duffel bag when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Emma froze, listened. One person, walking with purpose, military boots on tile. The footsteps stopped right outside the arms room door. The door opened. Warrant Officer Kate Hendricks stepped inside, still in her flight suit, clearly coming off a late-night training mission. She saw Emma, saw the duffel bag, saw the gear spread out on the table. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then Hendricks closed the door behind her and walked closer. She looked at the smoke grenades, the paint rounds, the carefully selected equipment. Her eyes moved to Emma's face. "I didn't see you, ma'am," Hendricks said quietly. "There's nothing to see," Emma replied. Hendricks nodded slowly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a protein bar, tossed it to Emma. "You might want that. Long couple of days coming up, I'm guessing." Emma caught it, looked at Hendricks. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Because I would be." Hendricks moved toward the door, paused. "Whatever you're doing, Captain, make it count. Some of us are tired of watching good people get pushed aside by loud ones." She left without waiting for a response. Emma stood alone as the red-lit darkness, protein bar in one hand, duffel bag at her feet. She could still turn back, could put everything away, go home, pretend this night had never happened, could be the good officer who accepted her exclusion and stayed in her lane. She thought about Miller's dog tags, the ones she kept in her desk drawer wrapped in the same bloody gauze she'd used trying to save him. She thought about Vaughn's face through the briefing room window, that small smile of satisfaction. She thought about Hale's question, "Are you weak?" Emma zipped the duffel bag closed, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out of the arms room. She took the back stairs to avoid any potential security patrols, moved across the darkened base with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere she chose to be. Her Subaru was parked in a distant lot, away from streetlights. She loaded the gear into the trunk, covered it with a wool blanket, and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. The map was committed to memory now, the radio frequency written on a scrap of paper tucked into her boot. The plan, such as it was, lived in her head where no one could find it. She started the engine and drove toward the western training areas, toward the mountains where Alpha Company would arrive in 16 hours, confident and unprepared and certain they knew what to expect. The roads turned from asphalt to gravel to dirt. She killed her headlights 2 miles out, navigating by moonlight and memory, following fire breaks and logging roads that didn't appear on official maps. At 0300 hours, she reached a turnaround point that overlooked a valley, parked the Subaru behind a stand of pines, and began the walk. 3 miles through forest, moving slowly, stopping every 100 meters to listen. The night was alive with sounds, wind through branches, distant owl calls, the rustle of small animals in underbrush. She moved through it like smoke, leaving almost no trail, disturbing almost nothing. She found what she was looking for just as the sky began to lighten in the east. An old ranger station from the 1980s, abandoned when budget cuts had reshaped the Forest Service. 2 stories, wood construction gone gray with age, windows boarded over. Most people had forgotten it existed, but Emma had found it on old survey maps during her research, had verified its location on satellite imagery. It sat near a creek, backed against a steep ridgeline, with clear sight lines down 3 approaches. Perfect. She cleared the interior quickly, checking for structural damage, verifying the floor would hold her weight. Then she began the work of turning an abandoned building into something that could keep her alive and hidden for 72 hours. Cache points in the trees outside, observation post on the 2nd floor, escape routes through the back window to the ridgeline, tripwires on the approaches, set low and careful. Everything placed with the kind of precision that came from doing this in places where mistakes earned a bullet. By 0600, she was done. The ranger station looked abandoned to casual inspection, but it was now hers. A spider's web, waiting. She climbed to the 2nd floor, settled into a corner where she could watch the valley below through gaps in the boards, and ate the protein bar Hendricks had given her. The sun rose slowly, burning off the morning mist, revealing the mountains in their autumn colors. Beautiful country, the kind of place people came to find peace. Emma wasn't here for peace. She opened her notebook and began to write, documenting what she prepared, what she would do, the timeline that would unfold. At the top of the page, she wrote the date in a single line. Day 1, hour 1. 8 sheep entering the valley. 1 wolf already here. They don't know the wolf is hungry. Then she set the notebook aside, checked her rifle, and settled in to wait. At 0800 hours, 12 miles away at Fort Bragg, Derek Vaughn stood in front of Alpha Company and delivered his final briefing before they loaded onto trucks for transport to the mountains. 8 soldiers in peak physical condition, trained and confident. Lieutenant Dana Reese would lead them, with Vaughn monitoring from base camp via radio. It's a simple 5-day exercise, Vaughn told them. Navigation, survival skills, standard stuff. You'll have everything you need. The only enemy out there is the terrain and your own limitations. Specialist Torres, 22 years old and convinced of his own invincibility, raised his hand. Sir, what about OP4, opposition force? Vaughn smiled. There is no OP4 on this exercise. You're alone out there, just you and the mountain. Think you can handle it? Laughter from the squad. Hell yes, sir. Vaughn dismissed them to final gear checks. As they dispersed, Lieutenant Reese approached him with a question about the medical evacuation plan. Vaughn pulled out his tablet, showed her the route, assured her it was solid. Neither of them knew the route had been planned without input from the Medical Service Corps officer who'd been excluded from the briefing. Neither of them knew that officer was currently sitting in an abandoned ranger station 3 miles from their planned route, watching the sunrise and thinking about all the ways confident people died when they underestimated the quiet ones. At 0930, Alpha Company loaded into trucks and began the drive to the mountains. They were loud, joking, full of the easy camaraderie of people who trusted each other and their leaders. They had no reason to believe this would be anything but a challenging but manageable few days in the woods. At 1100 hours, they arrived at the insertion point, unloaded their gear, and began the hike toward their first objective. 8 soldiers moving in tactical formation through beautiful country under a clear autumn sky. None of them noticed the footprints near the trailhead, already 4 hours old, left by boots 2 sizes smaller than any of theirs. None of them saw the woman watching from high ground, tracking their progress through binoculars, making notes about their formation, their spacing, their casual assumption that nothing in these woods meant them harm. Emma watched them disappear into the forest, heading exactly where she knew they would go, following the route she'd predicted they'd take. She gave them 30 minutes head start, then began to move parallel to their path, staying high, staying quiet, a ghost in the trees. The game had begun, but only one player knew it was a game. The others thought they were on a training exercise. They would learn differently soon enough. Emma moved through the forest like water finding downhill paths, flowing around obstacles, leaving almost nothing behind. She'd learned this in Ramadi, refined it during the long months of recovery, when physical therapy became obsession, and obsession became something harder and colder. Movement wasn't about speed, it was about efficiency, about reading terrain, about understanding that every step either brought you closer to surviving or closer to dying. She reached a ridgeline overlooking their projected campsite by 1400 hours, well ahead of Alpha Company's arrival. From here, she could see the small clearing they'd choose, the water source nearby, the natural defensive positions. It was tactically sound, exactly what any competent squad leader would pick, which meant it was predictable. Emma settled into an observation position, using her binoculars to study the approaches, the dead ground, the places where light and shadow would fall when night came. She made notes in her field book using abbreviated shorthand that would mean nothing to anyone else. At 1630 hours, Alpha Company arrived. She watched Lieutenant Reese halt the squad, send 2 soldiers to check the perimeter, then approve the site. They moved with reasonable discipline, establishing a patrol base, setting security, beginning the routine of soldiers in the field. But Emma saw the small mistakes. The way Specialist Torres dropped his pack too loudly. The 2 soldiers on security who stood too close together, silhouetting themselves against the sky. The fire Reese authorized, small and controlled, but still a beacon in the growing dark. She watched until full night fell, then withdrew to her ranger station. She had 6 hours of darkness to work with, 6 hours to do what needed doing. At 0100 hours, Emma approached their camp from the north, moving so slowly that an hour passed while she covered 200 meters. She could hear their breathing before she could see them. Two on security, rotating every 2 hours like the manual said to do. The others in sleeping bags, exhausted from the day's movement. She waited. Patience wasn't optional in this kind of work. It was the difference between mission success and body bags. At 0140, one of the security guards, a private named Chen, moved away from his position to relieve himself in the woods. Standard human need, standard tactical error. Emma followed him like a shadow, closing the distance while he was distracted and vulnerable. She didn't hurt him, didn't even touch him, just raised her paint marker pistol and dry fired it an inch from the back of his head. Click. Chen finished, zipped up, turned to head back to his position, took 3 steps before his hand went to the back of his neck. Touched something wet, brought his fingers up to his face in the moonlight. Red paint, dripping down his collar. He spun around, weapon coming up, eyes scanning the darkness. But Emma was already gone, moving back toward the camp perimeter while Chen tried to process what had just happened. She reached the edge of their perimeter, found the fighting position where the second guard sat, and placed a small piece of paper weighted down with a rock right next to his boot. Then she moved to their supply area, took out her knife, and made a single precise cut in the straps of 3 rucksacks. Not severing them completely, just weakening them enough that they'd fail under load at the worst possible time. And then she moved to the center of their camp, to the tarp they'd strung up as a command post. And in careful letters using her paint marker, she wrote a message across the tan fabric. 8 asleep, 1 awake, still dead. She was gone before Chen made it back to camp, before he alerted the second guard, before the entire squad came awake in controlled chaos trying to understand how someone had walked through their perimeter like it was made of smoke. Lieutenant Reese grabbed her radio, called it into Vaughn at base camp. Her voice was steady, professional, but Emma could hear the undertone of confusion, the note of something like fear. Sir, we've been compromised. Unknown hostile made contact. No injuries, but they were inside our perimeter. Paint marking on 1 soldier. Message left at CP. Static. Then Vaughn's voice, irritated at being woken. Reese, this is a training exercise. Probably just the cadre testing your security. Standard stuff. Sir, with respect, this wasn't standard. Whoever did this knows what they're doing. It's 0200 hours, Lieutenant. Get your people back to sleep and improve your security posture. Vaughn out. Reese stood in the center of her disrupted camp, looking at the message on the tarp, at Chen with paint still wet on his neck, at her soldiers who were now wide awake and very aware that their assumptions about being alone in these mountains had just been shattered. Specialist Torres voiced what several of them were thinking. How the hell did they get past 2 guards without making a sound? Reese didn't answer. She was looking at the footprints she'd found near the supply area. Small, precise. The stride length of someone moving with deliberate care. She pulled out her flashlight, studied the prints more carefully. Boot size maybe 7, significantly smaller than anyone in her squad. The depth suggested someone lighter, probably around 130, 140 pounds. She looked up at her soldiers. Increased security to 3 guards. Nobody sleeps more than 2 hours at a stretch. And somebody find me that piece of paper. Private Nakamura, the second guard, who'd somehow missed a person walking within 10 feet of his position, held up the note he'd found by his boot. It was a range card, the kind used for planning fields of fire, but this one had been modified. Someone had drawn in every position in their camp, every sector of fire, every dead space in their perimeter. And at the bottom, in the same careful handwriting as the message on the tarp, you were predictable. Reese studied the note in silence. She'd done 3 deployments, trained under some of the best NCOs in the Army. She knew what expert-level fieldcraft looked like, and this was expert level. But who the hell was out here with them? 3 miles away, Emma sat in the darkness of her ranger station, monitoring their radio frequency on her scanner. She'd heard the exchange with Vaughn, heard the doubt in Reese's voice, heard the major dismiss it as routine harassment. She smiled in the dark. Let him dismiss it. Let him be comfortable a few hours longer. She ate an MRE cold, drank water from her canteen, and settled in for 3 hours of sleep. The kind of sleep she'd learned in Ramadi, where you never fully shut down, where part of your brain stayed alert for the sounds that meant danger. At 0500, she woke to gray dawn light filtering through the boards. She did maintenance on her gear, checked her weapons, reviewed her notes for the day ahead. Alpha Company would be moving soon, heading toward their next objective. They'd be tired from broken sleep, paranoid about their perimeter, starting to question what they thought they knew. Good. Tired people made mistakes. Paranoid people saw threats everywhere and missed the real ones. And people who questioned themselves were already halfway to beaten. Emma packed her essential gear, cashed the rest, and moved out before full sunrise. She knew where Alpha Company was going because she knew the training plan better than they did. She'd studied it for 3 months while being excluded from every meeting where it was discussed. Exclusion had given her something they didn't have: time to think, to plan, to see the pattern from outside while they were trapped inside it. She reached the ridgeline overlooking their route by 0700 hours, settled into a position with good concealment and better observation, took out her notebook and began to write. Day 1 complete. 8 soldiers now aware they are not alone. Security improved but still vulnerable. Confidence shaken but not broken. Vaughn dismissed the threat. Leadership failure number 1. She paused, pen hovering over paper. Miller's voice in her memory, weak and fading. They left us behind, didn't they? Her own voice lying to him. They'll come back. Emma closed her eyes, breathed once, opened them again. Below her, Alpha Company was breaking camp, moving with better discipline now, but still following the predictable route, still trusting that the Army's plan would keep them safe. She watched through her rifle scope, not aiming, just observing. Specialist Torres moving with too much swagger, despite last night. Lieutenant Reese constantly checking her 6, learning but not fast enough. Private Chen walking like someone who'd been marked and knew it. 8 people who had no idea that the person watching them had been left for dead in Ramadi, while the platoon leader ordered retreat without checking casualties. 8 people who didn't know that platoon leader was now Major Derek Vaughn, and he'd buried the after-action report that would have mentioned his failure. 8 people who were about to learn that the quiet medic they'd never noticed was something else entirely. Emma settled deeper into her position, patient as stone, and waited for them to make their next mistake. They wouldn't have to wait long. Confident people always made mistakes. They just didn't realize it until someone showed them. And she was very good at showing people things they didn't want to see. The second day dawned with fog thick as wool. It rolled through the valleys, turning trees into ghosts and distances into mysteries. Emma had been awake since 0400, watching the mist gather, calculating how it would change the game. Alpha Company broke camp at 0630, later than planned. They'd spent the night in 2-hour rotations, nobody getting real sleep, everyone jumping at sounds that turned out to be wind or small animals or their own nerves. Lieutenant Reese looked tired in the gray light, the kind of tired that came from commanding people who'd lost their certainty. Emma watched them through her binoculars from 800 meters away, noting how they moved. More careful now, more suspicious. Torres kept looking over his shoulder. Chen flinched at a branch snapping. They were learning, but learning the wrong lessons. They thought the threat was behind them. They didn't understand it was all around them, patient and methodical, waiting for the next mistake. She let them move out, gave them a 30-minute head start, then followed. Not close enough to be detected, just close enough to know exactly where they were, what they were doing, how they were thinking. A wolf didn't chase the herd. A wolf studied it, learned its patterns, waited for the weak one to separate. By 0900 hours, Alpha Company reached a creek crossing, a natural checkpoint on their route. The water ran fast from recent rain, knee-deep in the middle, cold enough to steal breath. Reese halted the squad on the near bank, sent 2 soldiers across first to establish security on the far side, then began moving the rest across in pairs. Standard procedure. Exactly what the manual said to do. Emma had been there 2 hours earlier. She crossed the creek 100 meters upstream, where it was shallower, moved downstream along the far bank, and found a position with clear line of sight to the crossing point. Then she'd rigged something that would teach them about assumptions. She waited until 6 of them were across, 2 still on the near bank. Waited until they'd relaxed just slightly, thinking the dangerous part was over. Then she pulled the trip line she'd set up in the shallows, concealed under the water surface. The smoke grenade went off with a hollow thump, spewing thick red smoke across the creek. Not dangerous, not even particularly loud, but sudden and unexpected, and exactly the kind of thing that made trained soldiers react on instinct. They scattered, weapons up, shouting. Reese calling for a head count. Two soldiers dove for cover on the far bank. The two still on the near side dropped prone, scanning for threats. In the confusion, nobody noticed the small pops from 200 meters away. Paint rounds hitting with precision. One struck Specialist Torres square in the back of his helmet. Another caught Private Nakamura on his plate carrier. A third and fourth hit two more soldiers on their rucks. 4 shots, 4 hits, 8 seconds. By the time the smoke cleared and they realized what had happened, Emma was already moving, paralleling their route, staying in the dead ground where their sight lines couldn't reach. Reese pulled her squad together, did a quick check. 4 soldiers marked with paint. Clear headshots. Center mass hits. The kind of shooting that spoke to someone with serious training and better equipment than they'd expected to face. She got on the radio. Major Vaughn Alpha Actual, we've been engaged again. 4 simulated casualties. Shots from long range, high accuracy, requesting guidance. The response took longer than it should have. When Vaughn's voice came back, it had an edge to it. Define long range, Lieutenant. Reese looked at the tree line where she thought the shots had originated. Estimated 200 meters, sir. Possibly more. And sir, this wasn't trainers. This is someone with real capability. Static. Then, continue your mission, Lieutenant. This is still a training exercise. Maintain tactical discipline and adapt to the scenario. Reese stared at the radio like it had personally betrayed her. Sir, we need to reassess. We're operating under false assumptions about the threat environment. Your job is not to reassess, Lieutenant. Your job is to complete the exercise. Are your soldiers in actual danger? Reese looked at the 4 paint-marked soldiers. No, sir, but then continue mission. Vaughn out. The radio went dead. Reese stood there for a long moment, jaw tight, the kind of anger that came from being right and being ignored. Around her, her squad waited for orders, looking to her to make sense of a situation that had stopped making sense. She made a decision. Torres, Chen, your point, rotate every 30 minutes. Nakamura, rear security. Everyone else, maintain dispersion. If someone can shoot us from 200 meters, we don't give them clustered targets. And people, eyes up. Whoever this is, they're not playing by the rules we thought we knew. They moved out, more tactical now. Spacing improved, awareness heightened, but fear was starting to creep in. Not the sharp fear of immediate danger, but the slower poison of knowing you were being hunted by something you couldn't see or predict. Emma let them walk for 2 hours before the next contact. Let them start to hope maybe the attacks were over. Let them begin to think they might make it to the next checkpoint without incident. Then she hit them again. This time it was a trip flare, set low across a game trail they'd chosen because it looked easier than the primary route. The flare went off with a hiss and a pop, blinding in the afternoon shadows. And while they were focused on the light, on covering down, on trying to figure out where the threat was coming from, Emma put 2 more paint rounds into helmets from a completely different direction. 6 soldiers marked now. 3/4 of the squad technically dead by exercise standards. Reese didn't call it in this time. She just looked at her remaining soldiers and said quietly, we need to rethink everything. Private First Class Sarah Chen, the one who'd been marked on the first night, spoke up. Her voice was steady, but you could hear the question underneath. Ma'am, permission to speak freely. Go ahead. We keep assuming this is multiple people. What if it's not? What if it's one person moving faster than we think possible, hitting us from different angles because we're predictable? Reese considered this. The footprints they'd found had all been the same size. The tactics were consistent. One person made more sense than a team, but it also made the problem worse. Because if one person was dismantling an 8-soldier squad this effectively, it meant they were dealing with someone operating at a level none of them had trained for. One person, Reese said slowly, small boots, expert fieldcraft, comfortable operating alone for extended periods. She looked at her soldiers. Any of you know operators who fit that profile? Torres, who'd been marked twice now and was taking it personally, shook his head. SEALs don't operate in these mountains. Delta neither. Could be a contractor, someone brought in to test us without telling us. Or, Nakamura said quietly, it could be someone we pissed off. The words hung in the air like smoke. Everyone looked at him. Think about it, he continued. This isn't random harassment. This is personal. The messages, the precision, the way they're making us look stupid. This feels like someone with a grudge. Reese's mind was already going through possibilities, sorting through who might have the skills and the motivation. But before she could voice any of them, her radio crackled. Alpha Actual, this is Overwatch 6. That wasn't Vaughn's call sign. Reese keyed her handset. Overwatch 6, this is Alpha Actual. Identify. Warrant Officer Kate Hendricks, ma'am. I'm running an observation flight in your AO. Thought you might want some aerial support. Reese felt a flash of relief. Eyes in the sky changed everything. Roger, Overwatch. We are approximately 2 clicks south of Checkpoint 3. We have an unknown hostile conducting harassment operations. Can you scan our area? Copy that, Alpha. Beginning search pattern now. The helicopter was a UH-60 flying a grid pattern over the forest canopy. Hendricks was good, one of the best pilots at Bragg, and if anyone could spot a single person hiding in these mountains, it would be her. Emma heard the helicopter before she saw it, the distinctive whoop-whoop of rotor blades carrying through the valley. She'd expected this, had planned for it. Air support was the natural escalation when ground elements couldn't solve their own problems. She was already in position, tucked under an outcropping of rock that would shield her heat signature from thermal imaging, covered with a thermal blanket she'd brought specifically for this moment. The helicopter made 3 passes over her location, searching. But from the air, she was just another shadow among 10,000 shadows. She listened to the radio chatter on her scanner. Hendricks reporting negative contact. Reese's frustration coming through in clipped responses. The helicopter eventually moving to search a different sector, fuel and time both running short. When the sound of the rotors faded, Emma emerged and continued tracking Alpha Company. They'd used the air support to move faster, thinking they had Overwatch protection. They'd made good distance, but they'd also gotten sloppy, confident that eyes in the sky meant they were safe. By 1600 hours, they were setting up their second night's camp. Reese had chosen better this time, a more defensive position with clear fields of fire and limited approaches. She'd learned from the first night, set up 3 guard positions instead of 2, established a perimeter with early warning devices. Emma watched from 500 meters away, taking notes. They were adapting. Good. But adaptation based on yesterday's lessons wouldn't help with tomorrow's problems. She waited for full dark, then made her move, not toward their camp, towards something else entirely. At 1800 hours, back at Fort Bragg, Major Derek Vaughn sat in his office reviewing reports from the exercise. 2 days in, an Alpha Company was reporting contact with an unknown hostile. His initial assumption that it was training cadre had been proven wrong. The training coordinator had confirmed no personnel were in that sector, which meant someone else was out there, someone unauthorized, someone screwing with his exercise and making him look bad. His phone rang. Colonel Hale. Major Vaughn. Hale's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I hear you're having some difficulties with Mountain Forge. Sir, we have an unknown individual conducting unauthorized activities in the training area. I'm working to identify and remove them. I see. And how is Lieutenant Reese handling the situation? Vaughn hesitated. She's requested additional support, sir. I've denied it. This is a training exercise. They need to adapt and overcome. Even when the training parameters have changed without their knowledge? Something in Hale's tone made Vaughn's jaw tighten. Sir, are you saying you know who's out there? I'm saying, Hale replied carefully, that sometimes the best training comes from unexpected challenges. Your soldiers are learning real lessons about assumptions and complacency. Isn't that valuable? Sir, if you've put someone in my AO without telling me, that's a violation of... Of what, Major? Chain of command? Interesting choice of words from someone who excluded a qualified officer from planning sessions without justification. Vaughn went very still. You're talking about Reeves. I'm talking about leadership, Major. Real leadership isn't about controlling every variable. It's about how you respond when variables you didn't plan for start controlling you. The line went dead. Vaughn sat in silence, staring at the phone. Then he stood, grabbed his gear, and headed for the motor pool. If Hale wanted to play games, fine. But this was still his exercise, his soldiers, his reputation. And he wasn't going to let some medic with a grudge make him look incompetent. Within 30 minutes, he'd assembled a 4-man team. Senior NCOs, all of them experienced, all of them loyal. Sergeant First Class Grant, a sniper instructor. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, combat tracker. 2 others with infantry and reconnaissance backgrounds. We're going into the field, Vaughn told them. There's a hostile in the training area. 1 person, small frame, expert-level fieldcraft. I want them found and detained, non-lethal force, but I want this ended tonight. They loaded into 2 vehicles and drove toward the mountains as the sun set and the temperature dropped. Emma knew they were coming before they arrived. She'd been monitoring radio traffic, heard the change in Vaughn's voice when he talked to Hale, recognized the sound of a man who'd stopped thinking tactically and started thinking personally. Good. Personal meant predictable. Personal meant mistakes. She'd spent the last 2 hours rigging the abandoned ranger station. Not to defend it, to use it as bait. Every military mind thought in terms of bases, of positions to hold and defend. Vaughn would assume she'd dug in somewhere secure. He'd look for her base of operations, and she'd make sure he found it. By 2100 hours, Vaughn's team had reached the training area and begun their search. They moved with discipline, using night vision, communicating in whispers and hand signals. These were professionals, far more capable than Alpha Company's young soldiers. But they were also looking for a base camp, for a position, for something stationary they could surround and assault. At 2300 hours, they found the ranger station. Sergeant Grant spotted it through his scope, saw the faint signs of occupation. Boot prints, disturbed ground, the kind of details that said someone had been using this location. They moved into position, surrounded the building, prepared to breach. Vaughn gave the order. Flashbang through the window. Team storms in fast and hard. The flashbang detonated. The team rushed through the door, weapons up, voices shouting commands to a room that was completely empty. No gear, no supplies. Just a building that showed signs of recent use but had been clearly abandoned. And on the wall, written in large letters with paint, "You're late again." Underneath a date and timestamp from 6 hours earlier. Vaughn stood in the empty room, jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. She'd known they'd come, had left just enough evidence to draw them here, then vanished while they'd wasted hours searching. Grant came back from a perimeter sweep. "Sir, found something you need to see." Outside, arranged on a flat rock, they found 4 items: a Claymore mine training device, a tripwire, a smoke grenade, and a range card showing their exact approach routes to the building, every position they'd taken, every soldier's location marked with precision. The message was clear. "I saw you coming. I could have killed you. I chose not to." Underneath the range card, one more note. 12 soldiers hunting 1. 0 success. Ask why they're still alive. Vaughn picked up the note, read it twice, then crumpled it in his fist. His face had gone dark, the kind of anger that came from being outmaneuvered and knowing it. "Sir," Rodriguez said carefully, "whoever this is, they're operating at a Tier 1 level. This isn't some pissed-off soldier. This is someone with serious training." Vaughn turned on him. "I know what this is, Sergeant. This is Captain Emma Reeves, former combat medic, and she's about to learn what happens when you go rogue on my exercise." Grant and Rodriguez exchanged a glance. "Mosint." "A medic?" Grant said. "Sir, with respect, no medic has this kind of—" "She was in Ramadi," Vaughn cut him off. "Third ID. She had some training. But she's still just one person, and we're 4. We find her, we end this. How do you want to handle it, sir?" Vaughn looked at the empty ranger station, at the note mocking him. "We go hunting. Real hunting. Thermal optics. We sweep every sector until we find her heat signature. And when we do, we don't give her time to run. We end this fast." They spread out, began a systematic search using thermal scopes and night vision. 4 experienced soldiers against 1. The math should have been simple. But math didn't account for someone who'd learned to be invisible in places where visibility meant death. Math didn't account for someone who'd spent 18 months learning to move through a broken body's limitations until the limitations became advantages, teaching patience that healthy people never learned. Emma watched them from a position they'd already searched an hour earlier. She'd let them pass, then doubled back, using their own sweep pattern against them. Now she was behind them, watching them hunt for her in all the wrong places. She could have slipped away, could have avoided them entirely. But avoidance wasn't the lesson they needed to learn. She waited until they'd spread out in a search line, 50 meters between each soldier. Waited until Vaughn was at the northern end, Grant at the southern. Then she moved. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was checking a ravine when he heard a sound behind him. Turned, weapon coming up. Saw nothing. Scanned with thermal. Nothing. He took 2 steps forward, and his boot caught a wire he'd somehow missed. Paint mine detonated, covering him in red. His curses echoed through the forest. The other three converged on his position, weapons ready, found Rodriguez standing there, paint dripping, looking at a tripwire that hadn't been there when he'd passed through the area 15 minutes earlier. "She's close," he said, "real close." They went back to back, scanning 360 degrees. Nothing on thermal, nothing on night vision. Just forest and shadow and the growing realization that they were fighting someone who understood this terrain better than they did. Grant moved to higher ground, set up a hasty firing position with good observation, scanned the area through his thermal scope, caught a flash of heat signature 200 meters out, moving fast. "Contact," he called softly. 200 meters heading west. They moved toward it, tactical and controlled, reached the location, found a heat pack, the kind used in MREs, tucked into a bush and still radiating warmth. A decoy. While they'd been chasing the heat signature, Emma had circled behind them again. She was 50 meters from Vaughn, watching him through her rifle scope. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he moved with barely controlled anger. She could put a paint round into him right now. End this demonstration with the kind of humiliation that would follow him for years. But that wasn't the point. The point wasn't to beat Vaughn. The point was to make him understand what he'd done in Ramadi, what his failure had cost. She lowered her rifle and moved away, leaving them to search for a ghost. At 0200 hours, Vaughn called off the hunt. His team was exhausted, frustrated, and down one soldier to paint mine. They'd been outmaneuvered by a single person who'd turned their own tactics against them. He got on the radio to base camp. "This is Vaughn. I need drone support, additional personnel, and authorization to expand the search parameters." The response came from Colonel Hale, who'd apparently been monitoring the command net. "Request denied, Major. You have sufficient resources. Use them better." "Sir, this situation has escalated beyond." "Has it, Major? Or have you simply encountered someone who understands tactical operations better than you anticipated?" "Sir, Captain Reeves is conducting unauthorized—" Hale's voice turned cold. "Captain Reeves is conducting an evaluation that I authorized. The only person operating outside parameters here is you, Major. You entered the field without my approval, pulled resources from other missions, and are now requesting additional support because you can't handle a situation you created." Silence on the radio, then Vaughn, voice tight. "Sir, I don't understand. You excluded Captain Reeves from planning. You dismissed her expertise. You treated her like she was invisible. So I gave her a mission. Make herself impossible to ignore. She's succeeding, you're failing. The question is whether you're smart enough to learn why." The radio went dead again. Vaughn stood in the darkness, surrounded by his team, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt, not about his skills, about his judgment, about the assumptions he'd been operating under since Ramadi. Back then, he'd made a call. Enemy contact, casualties mounting, situation deteriorating. He'd ordered the retreat because staying meant losing more soldiers. It was the right call, the tactical call, except he'd counted wrong. Hadn't verified everyone was accounted for. Had left Emma and Miller behind because in the chaos and the fear, he'd trusted his count instead of checking. Miller had died. Emma had survived. And he'd buried it in the after-action report because admitting the mistake would have ended his career. Now she was out here, showing him what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. Showing him what invisible felt like. At 0300 hours, Emma made one more move. She approached Alpha Company's camp, not to attack but to leave a message. She'd been tracking them all day while simultaneously evading Vaughn's team. Two tactical problems solved simultaneously because she'd learned to think in layers while they thought in lines. The camp was better defended tonight. 3 guards, overlapping fields of observation. But guards got tired, attention wandered, and Emma had more patience than anyone in that camp could imagine. She waited for the guard rotation at 0330. The moment of handoff when old guards were tired and new guards were still adjusting their eyes to the darkness. A 30-second window. She slipped through it like smoke, made her way to their supply area. Didn't sabotage anything, didn't take anything, just left a note weighted down with a rock where Lieutenant Reese would find it at first light. 12 soldiers hunting 1. 0 success. You're learning the wrong lessons. The question isn't how I avoid you, it's why I keep letting you live. Then she was gone, vanishing back into the forest as the new guards settled into their positions, never knowing she'd been there. At 0500, as gray light began to filter through the trees, Emma sat in a new hide site 3 miles from both Alpha Company and Vaughn's team. She ate an MRE, drank water, and reviewed her notes. Day 2 complete. 12 soldiers now engaged. 0 actual casualties. Multiple simulated kills. Vaughn personally committed. Hale protecting the operation. Alpha Company understanding they're overmatched. She paused, then added one final power moment to her documentation. At 0430, before settling into her hide site, she had done something that would be discovered later. Something that would drive home the lesson with brutal clarity. She had infiltrated Vaughn's temporary camp while his 4-man team slept, exhausted from the failed hunt. Had moved through their perimeter the same way she'd moved through Alpha Companies. Had stood over each sleeping soldier and placed a small piece of tape on their foreheads. White medical tape, the kind every combat medic carried. On each piece of tape, written in permanent marker, a single word, dead. When they woke at 0600, all 4 would find the tape, would realize that while they'd been hunting her, she'd been close enough to kill them in their sleep, would understand that every breath they took after that moment was because she'd chosen mercy over mission completion. Emma wrote this in her notebook. Final demonstration for Vaughn's team. 4 soldiers marked while sleeping. Message clear. Superior skill chooses when to be lethal. This is the difference between competence and overconfidence. She closed the notebook, checked her weapons, reviewed her supply situation. She had enough for 2 more days if she was careful. The original 72-hour timeline was almost up, but something had changed. Hale's protection meant she could extend the operation. Push harder, make the lesson impossible to ignore. But there was a cost to pushing. Every hour out here was an hour of risk. Every contact increased the chances of a mistake. And mistakes in the field didn't care about your justification. They just killed you. Emma looked at her left knee, the one that still ached in cold mornings. She'd survived Ramadi through a combination of skill, luck, and the kind of stubbornness that refused to die just because dying would be easier. She'd survived because Miller's last words had been true. They had left them behind, and she'd made a promise to his memory that she would never be someone who left soldiers behind. Not physically, not tactically, not morally. This whole operation was about that promise. Making Vaughn understand what he'd done. Making these soldiers understand that complacency killed. Making herself understand whether she was strong enough to show mercy to someone who'd shown her none. The sun rose higher. Somewhere to the south, Alpha Company would be finding her note. Somewhere to the north, Vaughn's team would be waking to tape on their foreheads in the devastating understanding that they'd been completely vulnerable. And here, in between, she would be deciding whether to end this demonstration or push it to the breaking point. She made her decision, packed her gear, moved to the next position. The wolf wasn't done hunting. At 0700 hours, Lieutenant Reese found the note, read it, read it again, then called her squad together. Listen up, she said. We've been playing defense for 2 days, reacting, running, getting picked apart. That ends now. She held up the note. This person, whoever they are, has been teaching us that we're vulnerable. Fine, lesson learned, but we're not helpless. We're trained soldiers, and it's time we started acting like it. Torres spoke up. Ma'am, what are you proposing? We stop running their course, Reese said. We start running ours. We know they're tracking us, so we give them something to track. We set our own trap. How, ma'am? We split up. 3 teams of 2. Each team takes a different route to the next checkpoint. Whoever they follow, the other teams can flank. We turn this from them hunting us into us hunting them. It was risky, divided their already depleted force, but it was also thinking tactically instead of just reacting. The kind of adaptation that Reese hoped would finally turn the tables. She didn't know that Emma had anticipated this exact move, had in fact been waiting for them to stop being victims and start being soldiers. Because the real lesson wasn't about staying helpless. It was about understanding that tactical excellence wasn't enough. You also needed to know why you were fighting. And Emma knew her why. It had a name. It had dog tags. It had a grave marker at Arlington that she visited every year on the anniversary of a decision that should never have been made. She watched through binoculars as Alpha Company divided into 3 teams. Watched them move out on diverging routes. Watched Reese trying to think like a hunter instead of prey. Good, Emma thought. Now we can have a real conversation. She chose the route Reese was taking, not because it was easiest, because Reese was the one learning the fastest, the one asking the right questions, the one who deserved to find the answers. Emma moved through the forest like water finding downhill, paralleling Reese's team, staying just out of sight, waiting for the moment when a question could become an answer and a demonstration could become understanding. That moment was coming, soon, and when it arrived, everything would change. Because the wolf had never been hunting sheep. The wolf had been teaching sheep how to become wolves, and the lesson was almost complete. The third day broke cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning where breath turned to fog and frost painted the world silver. Emma had slept in 2-hour increments, never fully unconscious, always aware of the wind's direction and the sounds that meant safety or danger. Old habits from Ramadi, where sleep was a luxury you earned by staying alive. She'd been tracking Lieutenant Reese's team since 0500, moving parallel to their route, noting how they'd changed their tactics, split into pairs, varied their pace, used terrain better. They were learning. The question was whether they were learning fast enough. By 0800, Reese had led her partner, Private Chen, to a ridgeline overlooking a narrow valley. Good tactical position. Clear sight lines. Multiple escape routes. The kind of place a smart soldier would pick for an observation post. It was also exactly where Emma had known they'd go. She'd been there since 0600, hidden in a cluster of boulders 50 meters from where Reese would set up. Close enough to hear their breathing when they arrived. Close enough to count the times Reese checked her 6. Close enough to see the moment Chen noticed something wrong. "Ma'am," he whispered, pointing to a spot on the ground 15 feet from their position. Reese moved closer, careful, weapon ready. Found what Chen had seen. Boot prints in the frost. Small, fresh, leading to the boulder cluster and then away, following a path that would have given perfect observation of their approach. "She'd been here," Reese said quietly, "watching us arrive." Chen scanned the area, eyes wide. "She could be watching us right now." "Yes," Emma said, stepping out from behind a tree 30 feet away. "She could be." Both soldiers spun, weapons coming up. Emma stood with her rifle slung, hands visible, no threat in her posture. Just a woman in worn OCPs standing in the morning light like she'd been invited to this meeting. Reese's weapon stayed up, finger indexed along the receiver, not on the trigger. Military discipline, holding even through surprise. "Captain Reeves?" Emma nodded. "Lieutenant." Chen kept his weapon trained on her, but his hands were shaking slightly. The young private who'd been marked on the first night, now face to face with the person who'd been hunting them for 3 days. "Lower your weapon, Private," Reese said. "She's not a threat right now." "Ma'am, she's our logistics officer," Reese finished, "and she's standing there with her rifle slung. If she wanted us dead, we'd be dead. Lower your weapon." Chen complied, but kept his hand near his sidearm, ready. Emma appreciated Reese's tactical thinking. Smart to recognize threat versus demonstration. Smart to stay alert, but not escalate. The lieutenant was proving why she'd been worth following instead of the others. "Why?" Reese asked. Just that one word, but it carried everything. Why this exercise? Why the attacks? Why reveal herself now? Emma moved closer, slow and deliberate, until she stood 10 feet away. Because Major Vaughn needed to understand what he did, and because you all needed to understand what complacency costs. What he did? Reese's eyes narrowed. This is about Ramadi. It wasn't a question. Emma could see Reese putting pieces together, making connections that others had missed. Ramadi, Emma confirmed. Spring 2007, third ID. We got hit by a complex ambush. IED followed by small arms. Platoon leader ordered retreat without confirming everyone made it to the vehicles. "Vaughn," Reese said. Emma nodded. 2 soldiers were left behind. Private Miller and me. Miller died because help didn't come. I survived because I learned to be invisible. The words settled into the cold morning air. Chen was listening now, weapon completely lowered, understanding dawning on his face. "You did all this," Reese said slowly, "to teach Major Vaughn a lesson about leaving people behind?" "No," Emma replied. "I did this to teach all of you a lesson about assumptions. You assumed I was just a medic, just a desk officer, just someone who didn't matter. Vaughn assumed his tactical decisions in Ramadi were sound. Command assumed splitting you into small teams without proper support was acceptable. Everyone assumed wrong." She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket, the one she'd been writing in for 3 days, held it up. "I have documentation on every mistake your squad made, every gap in your security, every moment where a real enemy could have killed you. I'm going to submit this to Colonel Hale, and he's going to use it to improve training for every unit at Bragg." Reese absorbed this. So this whole exercise was evaluation, Emma finished. I was the red cell, the enemy force you didn't know about, testing whether your training was actually preparing you for combat or just making you confident in your vulnerabilities. And we failed, Chen said quietly. You survived, Emma corrected. That's not failure. Failure is not learning from the experience. Reese lowered her weapon completely, slung it. Ma'am, with respect, you've made your point. 12 soldiers couldn't catch one. We get it, we're humbled. But what now? Do we just walk back to base? Now, Emma said, you tell me what you learned. Not about tactics, about people. People? I could have killed Major Vaughn last night, Emma said. Had him in my sights. Clean shot. Instead, I let him walk away. Why? Because you're not a murderer, Chen offered. No, Emma said, because revenge isn't the mission. Teaching is. I wanted Vaughn to understand what Miller felt. Abandoned, helpless. Watching people walk away who should have stayed. Did he? Reese asked. Understand? I don't know yet, Emma admitted. That's why I'm here. Because the demonstration only works if people understand what they're seeing. Before Reese could respond, the radio on her belt crackled. All Alpha elements, this is Overwatch 6. Be advised, Major Vaughn is en route to your last known position with 4 personnel. ETA 10 minutes. That was Hendricks, the helicopter pilot, giving them warning. Emma and Reese locked eyes. You could run, Reese said. I could, Emma agreed, but I won't. Time for the final lesson. What lesson? Emma checked her rifle, then looked back at Reese. The lesson that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one holding all the cards. She moved to a position with good cover and clear sight lines to the approach roads. Reese and Chen exchanged glances, then without being asked, they moved to flanking positions. Not to attack Emma, to observe what was about to happen. 10 minutes later, Major Derek Vaughn appeared on the trail below, moving fast with his 4-man team. Sergeant Grant on point, scanning with his rifle scope. Rodriguez and the others spread in tactical formation. They looked tired. 3 days of being outmaneuvered had worn them down. Vaughn halted his team 50 meters from the ridgeline, studying the terrain. Emma could see him thinking, calculating, trying to predict where she might be. He made a decision, hand signals to his team. They began to move up the slope in bounding overwatch, professional and controlled. When they were 30 meters away, Emma stood up from her concealed position. Rifle slung, hands visible, standing in plain sight. Vaughn froze. His team reacted instantly, weapons coming up, fingers on triggers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Captain Reeves, Vaughn said. His voice was tight, controlled, but underneath was something Emma had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. Major, she replied calmly, you're under arrest for unauthorized. I'm under Colonel Hale's direct orders, Emma interrupted. Everything I've done was authorized. You're the one operating outside parameters, sir. You entered the field without permission, pulled resources without clearance, made this personal when it was supposed to be professional. Vaughn's jaw worked. You've been sabotaging my exercise for 3 days. I've been evaluating your exercise, Emma corrected. And it failed. Your soldiers were unprepared. Your planning was inadequate. And your leadership put ego ahead of mission effectiveness. You don't get to judge my leadership. No, sir, Emma agreed. Results judge your leadership. And the results are clear. 8 soldiers couldn't defend against 1. 4 senior NCOs couldn't track 1. You personally couldn't locate 1. In a real combat scenario, you'd all be casualties. Grant spoke up from his position. Sir, she's right. We've been beaten at every turn. Shut up, Sergeant, Vaughn snapped. Then to Emma. You think you've proven something? You think this demonstration means anything? It means, Emma said quietly, that competence matters more than confidence. That quiet people aren't weak people. That the soldier you ignore might be the one who saves your life, or the one you leave behind to die. The last words hit Vaughn like a physical blow. His face went pale. Ramadi, he said, you're still holding Ramadi against me. I'm not holding anything, sir. I'm showing you what it looks like from the other side. From Miller's side. From the side of the people who got left behind because you didn't check your count. I made a tactical decision, Vaughn said, but his voice had lost its edge. We were taking casualties. Staying would have cost more lives. Maybe, Emma allowed, but leaving without verifying cost Miller his life, and it would have cost mine if I hadn't learned to survive on my own. She took a step forward. Vaughn's team tensed, but he held up a hand to keep them in place. You buried it in your report, Emma continued. Made it sound like an acceptable loss. Combat friction. Fog of war. All the phrases that make mistakes sound inevitable instead of preventable. What did you want me to do? Vaughn's voice rose. Destroy my career over one mistake? No, sir, Emma said. I wanted you to learn from it, to make sure you never left another soldier behind, to understand that leadership isn't about protecting your reputation. It's about protecting your people. The silence that followed was broken only by wind through the trees. Vaughn stood there, surrounded by his team, facing a woman he'd tried to make invisible, and maybe for the first time understanding what invisible felt like. From the tree line, Colonel Hale appeared, moving with the quiet authority of someone who'd been watching the entire exchange. His aide followed 2 steps behind. At ease, everyone, Hale said. Weapons were lowered. Postures relaxed fractionally. Hale walked to the center of the group, looking at each person in turn. Captain Reeves, he said. Report. Emma pulled out her notebook, opened to a marked page. Sir, in 72 hours, I conducted 14 separate engagements against 12 soldiers and 4 senior NCOs. Simulated casualties, 14. Actual casualties, 0. I penetrated secured perimeters 5 times, evaded aerial surveillance twice, and demonstrated critical gaps in training doctrine, communications security, and tactical awareness. She handed him the notebook. Full documentation is here, sir. Recommendations for training improvements attached. Hale took the notebook, flipped through it. Thorough, he said, as expected. Then he turned to Vaughn. Major, you were told not to enter the field. You disobeyed that order. Well, sir, I believe there was a security threat. You believed, Hale interrupted, that your authority was being challenged. You believed that a junior officer was making you look bad. So you made it personal instead of professional. Vaughn said nothing. What defense could he offer? Major Vaughn, Hale continued, you are an excellent tactician. Your record speaks to that, but excellence in tactics doesn't excuse failure in judgment. You excluded Captain Reeves from planning because she made you uncomfortable. You dismissed her expertise because it came from someone you didn't respect. And when that came back to bite you, you escalated instead of learning. Hale looked at the gathered soldiers. All of you have learned something in the last 3 days. Lieutenant Reese learned to question her assumptions. Private Chen learned that confidence without competence is dangerous. Sergeant Grant learned that experience doesn't guarantee success. His eyes settled on Vaughn. And you, Major, learned what it feels like to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to have your expertise ignored because someone decided you didn't matter. Vaughn's shoulders sagged slightly. Yes, sir. Good, Hale said. Because that's the only way you'll understand what you did in Ramadi, not the tactical decision. The human one. You left soldiers behind and then buried it to protect yourself. Captain Reeves has spent 3 days showing you what that cost. Not just to her, to every person who learns they can't trust their leadership when things go wrong. He handed the notebook back to Emma. Captain, you're relieved of your evaluation duties. Return to base, complete your after-action report, and prepare to brief the senior staff on your findings. Emma saluted. Yes, sir. Hale turned to Vaughn. Major, you and I will have a private conversation about your future. Sergeant Grant, escort your team back to base camp. Grant nodded. Yes, sir. Come on, people. As the soldiers began to disperse, Reese approached Emma. She extended her hand. Ma'am, that was the most intense training I've ever experienced, and the most valuable. Emma shook her hand. You're going to be a good officer, Lieutenant. You asked the right questions. I learned from the best, Reese replied, even if she had to hunt us through the woods to teach us. She walked away, leaving Emma alone on the ridgeline with Hale. You pushed hard, Hale said quietly. Almost too hard. Sir, I'm not criticizing, Captain. I'm observing. You took risks, infiltrating camps with armed soldiers, operating alone for 3 days. That kind of operation can break people. I've been broken before, sir. I know what it feels like. This wasn't that. What was it? Emma looked out over the mountains, at the valleys where she'd spent 3 days being invisible, being the threat nobody saw coming. It was proving I'm not the person they thought I was. Not the person Vaughn tried to make me. And who are you? Emma considered the question, thought about Miller dying in her arms, about 18 months relearning how to walk, about 3 days showing soldiers what they'd missed. I'm the person who survived when I shouldn't have, she said. And who decided that meant something? Hale nodded slowly. I'm putting you up for promotion to major. You've earned it. Emma felt the words settle over her like weight. Sir, I know you don't need it, Hale said. But the Army needs you. Needs people who understand that leadership isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the most competent. What about Vaughn, sir? Hale's face was unreadable. That's between him and his conscience, and his chain of command. He walked away, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts and the morning sun climbing higher in a sky that had witnessed 3 days of lessons learned and pride humbled. That evening, back at Fort Bragg, Emma sat in her small office writing the after-action report. The building was quiet, most people gone home. She'd showered, changed into a fresh uniform, but she could still smell the forest on her skin, still feel the weight of 3 days moving through darkness. A knock at her door. She looked up. Warrant Officer Hendricks stood there with 2 cups of coffee. "Heard you might need this," Hendricks said, coming in without waiting for invitation. Emma accepted the coffee. "Thanks." Hendricks sat in the spare chair. That was some performance out there. It was a training exercise. It was a statement, Hendricks corrected, and everyone heard it. The whole base is talking about how the quiet medic made the Golden Boy Major look like a fool. That wasn't the point. "I know," Hendricks said gently, "but it's the result. You know how this place works. Perception becomes reality." Emma sipped her coffee, said nothing. "For what it's worth," Hendricks continued, "some of us already knew you weren't just a desk officer. Torres told me what you did. Let me take that gear without questions. You could have reported me." "Could have," Hendricks agreed. "Didn't want to. Some fights need to be fought, even if the rules don't account for them." She stood to leave, paused at the door. "Emma, the world is full of loud people who mistake volume for competence. And it's full of quiet people who know better but let themselves be silenced. You stop being silent. Don't start again." She left. Emma sat alone, staring at the half-written report on her screen. She could write it clinically. Just facts and observations. Strip out the emotion, the history, the reason why. Or she could write it honestly. Explain that training wasn't just about tactics and procedures. It was about culture, about who got listened to and who got ignored, about systems that valued confidence over competence and punished people for being different. She chose honesty, spent the next 3 hours writing a report that would make some people uncomfortable and make others think. When she finished, it was well past midnight. She saved the file, shut down her computer, and sat in the darkness of her office. Thought about Miller, about the promise she'd made to his memory, about whether the last 3 days had honored that promise or twisted it into something he wouldn't recognize. In her desk drawer, she found his dog tags, held them in the dim light from the window. The metal was still cool, still solid, still carrying his name and service number. "I hope I did right," she whispered to the empty room. "Hope you'd understand why." The dog tags offered no answer. The dead never did. But the weight of them in her hand felt right, like an anchor, like a reminder that some promises were worth keeping even when they cost you something. She put the tags back in the drawer, locked her office, walked out into a night that was cold and clear and full of stars that didn't care about the small dramas of soldiers working through their demons. 3 months later, the promotion ceremony was held in the battalion headquarters. Emma stood at attention in dress uniform, while Colonel Hale removed the captain bars from her shoulders and replaced them with the gold oak leaves of a major. Her father had driven up from South Carolina, tears in his eyes as he watched his daughter become what she'd fought so hard to earn. The assembled officers applauded politely. Most of them had read her after-action report. Some were angry, some were thoughtful, some were already implementing her recommendations. Major Derek Vaughn was not in attendance. He'd been reassigned to a staff position at division headquarters. Not a punishment, officially. Just a recognition that his talents were better suited elsewhere. Everyone understood what that meant. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and the congratulations, Emma found a quiet corner outside. Lieutenant Reese approached, now sporting a new tab on her shoulder. "Ranger qualified, earned in the 2 months since the exercise." "Congratulations, Major," Reese said. "Congratulations yourself, Lieutenant. Ranger school treating you well?" "Hardest thing I've ever done," Reese admitted. "But after spending 3 days being hunted by you, it felt manageable." Emma smiled. "You'll do well, Dana. You have the instincts." "I had a good teacher," Reese said, "even if she had to terrorize me to teach the lessons." They stood together, watching the sun set over the training fields where soldiers ran their formations and learned their skills and prepared for a world that didn't care about their assumptions. "Think it made a difference?" Reese asked. "What you did?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Maybe for some, maybe for all of them. Maybe just for me." "What did you learn?" "That being invisible only works if you choose it. Once someone makes you invisible against your will, you have to decide whether to stay hidden or step into the light. And you chose the light." Emma thought about that, about 3 days in the forest, about messages written in paint, about moments where she could have killed but chose mercy instead. "I chose to be seen," she said finally. "Whether that's light or something else, I'm still figuring out." Reese nodded, understanding the kind of honesty that didn't fit into neat categories. She saluted, not because protocol required it, but because respect did. Emma returned the salute. Watched the young lieutenant walk away toward a career that would be shaped by lessons learned in the mountains. Lessons about competence and assumptions and the cost of underestimating the quiet ones. That night, Emma drove to Arlington. Made the trip she made every year, walking through rows of white markers that stretched like accusations across the manicured grass. Found the one she was looking for. Private First Class James Miller. Died in service to his country, age 22. She knelt beside the stone, placed her hand on the cold marble. "I kept my promise," she said quietly. "Made sure they understood what it costs. Made sure Vaughn knows. Made sure it mattered." The stone was silent. The dead always were. But in the silence, Emma found something like peace. Not forgiveness, not closure, just the understanding that some debts could never be fully paid. But trying to pay them mattered anyway. She stood, saluted, walked back to her car as the sun set and the shadows grew long. 3 months later, Emma received orders. New assignment, training and doctrine command, developing curriculum for leadership development. Her after-action report had made waves, started conversations, forced people to think about the difference between training soldiers and preparing them for the reality of combat. She would spend the next phase of her career making sure that quiet people got heard, that competence mattered more than volume, that the lessons learned in those mountains became part of how the Army trained its leaders. It was good work, important work, the kind of mission that honored Miller's memory better than revenge ever could. But sometimes on nights when sleep wouldn't come and memories did, Emma would remember the feeling of moving through dark forest, of being the wolf among sheep, of showing people who thought they knew what strength looked like that they'd been measuring the wrong things. She would remember standing on that ridgeline with Vaughn, seeing understanding finally dawn in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, just recognition that he'd made a mistake and lived with the consequences by making someone else pay the price. And she would remember her own choice, to show mercy, to teach instead of punish, to be better than the anger that had driven her into those mountains. Some people called it weakness, choosing not to destroy someone when you had the power. Emma knew better. Mercy wasn't weakness. It was strength, choosing not to break something just because it could. The wolf had proven she could hunt, had shown everyone what they'd missed, had made the invisible impossible to ignore. Now the wolf was teaching others to see what she'd seen, to value what they'd dismissed, to understand that the quietest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Not because they wanted to hurt you, but because they understood things you'd never thought to learn. It was better than revenge, better than anger, better than staying invisible. It was choosing to matter on her own terms, not theirs. And in the end, that was the lesson Miller had needed her to learn. Not that she'd survived when he hadn't, but that survival meant something only if you used it to make sure others didn't have to learn the same lessons the hard way. The wolf walked among the sheep now, not to hunt them, but to teach them how to become wolves themselves. Strong, silent, deadly when necessary. But always, always choosing when and why to bare their teeth. That was the real power, not the ability to destroy, but the wisdom to know when not to. Emma Reeves understood that now. Understood it in her bones, in her scars, in every step she took on a knee that reminded her what survival cost. And she carried that understanding forward into a career that would touch thousands of soldiers, teaching them that the measure of a warrior wasn't how loud they could roar. It was how much they could accomplish in silence. On a spring morning 2 years after Mountain Forge, Emma sat in her new office at Fort Leavenworth, reviewing training curriculum with a team of instructors. The window looked out over parade fields where the next generation of leaders learned to march in formation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Hendricks, now a chief warrant officer flying Apaches. "Saw your article in Infantry magazine." About time someone said it. Emma smiled. The article had been titled "The Silence Before Action, Rethinking Leadership in Modern Combat." It had quoted no names, cited no specific incidents, but everyone who'd been at Fort Bragg 3 years ago knew exactly what it was about. Another text, this one from Reese, now a captain commanding her own company. "Teaching my lieutenants the lessons you taught me. They think I'm crazy when I make them plan like someone's always watching. Then I tell them about the wolf." Emma typed back to both. "The wolf says keep teaching, keep questioning, Keep making the quiet ones heard. She set the phone down and returned to her work. Outside, soldiers drilled under a clear sky. Somewhere in those formations were the next Emma Reeves, the next quiet, competent soldier who would be underestimated and dismissed until the moment they proved everyone wrong. Her job now was to make sure the army was ready to see them, to listen to them, to understand that strength came in many forms, and the quietest voice sometimes carried the most important message. The wolf they didn't see coming had made sure they would never forget. And somewhere in a graveyard in Arlington, a name carved in marble stood as a reminder that some lessons were written in blood and loss, and the promise that those who survived would make it mean something. Emma Reeves had kept that promise, and she would keep teaching it until her own name joined the others on the wall of those who'd served. But not today. Today she had work to do. The wolf smiled and got back to teaching sheep how to survive in a world that ate the unprepared. I spent 3 months researching military training protocols to get this story right. The most haunting part? Real combat medics told me they've felt invisible their entire careers, until the moment everything falls apart and everyone needs them. Emma's 72-hour demonstration isn't just about tactical superiority. It's about every quiet professional who gets dismissed until crisis proves they were right all along. Question for you veterans and military families. Have you ever witnessed someone underestimated completely change the game? Drop your stories below. And if this hit different, there's more where this came from. Hit subscribe.